Hey guys, tonight we journey into a world you think you know, but trust me, you don't. Marriage in the Middle Ages. You've seen the weddings in movies, candlelit chapels, noble lords exchanging oaths with elegant ladies, long feasts with roasted boars and bards singing love ballads. But the real story, it's not quite as dreamy. In fact, it's muddy, political, awkward, and sometimes smells suspiciously of livestock. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these slow, strange trips through time. And hey, tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. I always love seeing how many of us are wandering the past together across time zones. All right, deep breath, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background, and let's slip together into tonight's story. Tonight's journey, what it was really like to marry in medieval times. Let's set the stage. It's not about love, not usually. Marriage in medieval Europe, whether you were a peasant with one chicken or a noble with 4 castles, was first and foremost a transaction. A merger, a legally binding business agreement forged between families, not people. Between fathers, not lovers. Between dowries and inheritance papers, not shared interests in music or long walks by the moat. Romance, if it happened at all, was a happy accident. And you're about to wake up in this world. Maybe you're a merchant's daughter with 2 eligible suitors and a strict uncle who values roof repairs over your feelings. Maybe you're a farm boy with a sheep, a pair of good boots, and dreams of marrying the baker's daughter as long as your parents agree to give up the family's only pig as a dowry. Or maybe you're a young noblewoman betrothed since age 6 to a man 20 years, your senior who once jousted a goose by accident and hasn't smiled since. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to feel the weight of expectations pressed into every gesture, every glance, every spoonful of soup eaten in front of a potential mother-in-law. Because in the Middle Ages, marriage wasn't something you did out of passion. It was something you endured. It was your duty, your fate, your family's legacy hanging on the hinge of your womb, your land, or your obedience. So tonight, we're not crashing the wedding. We're living it. From the moment you open your eyes on your wedding day to the first awkward breakfast with your new in-laws, we'll walk the aisle step by gritty step. No filter, no fairy tale, just the raw, itchy, politically inconvenient truth. Ready? Let's step into the veil. And by veil, I mean the one made of coarse wool that smells like goat, because lace hasn't been invented yet, and your dowry didn't include a bath. Welcome to medieval marriage. You wake up to the sound of church bells. Not the elegant toll of romance or celebration, no. These bells are loud, clanging, and deeply judgmental. They don't sing you awake. They drag you into the cold reality of your wedding day, like a rusty rake through frozen dirt. Your back hurts. That's your first thought. Your second? You're sweating and freezing, somehow both. Your body stuck to a straw mattress that feels like someone stuffed it with discarded broom bristles and a generous helping of fleas. The blanket, if you can call it that, is a rough wool sheet stiffened from years of use and at least 3 kinds of mysterious stains. Your breath fogs in front of your face. The room is cold, not just need a hoodie cold, but did I die and get buried in a crypt? Cold. The walls are stone, sweating with condensation. A single tiny slit in the wall, not a window, just a glorified ventilation wound, lets in a sliver of grey morning light and absolutely none of the warmth you prayed for last night. The air smells like wet cloth, boiled onions, and damp wool that's been fermenting in the corner for about a decade. Also, chickens. Because of course there are chickens. You hear one pecking somewhere under the cot, fluffing around as though she's the one getting married today. And then you remember, oh no, It's today, your wedding day. You try to sit up, but immediately regret it. Your joints creak. You're not old, just medieval. Your body has been conditioned by a lifetime of malnutrition, damp floors, shared bedding, and questionable hygiene. You blink through the murky light. Your room is about the size of a modern closet, shared with at least 2 siblings, one of whom is currently snoring into what used to be a turnip sack, and some essential furniture, a wooden stool, a chipped basin, and a chest that doubles as both storage and, when necessary, a table. Someone has left your wedding clothes out, hanging from a crude wooden peg. They look freshly brushed, but that's a generous interpretation. The dress or tunic, if you're the groom, is made of coarse, scratchy wool, dyed a dull brownish grey. It's been in the family for 3 generations. It smells like mildew and pride. You glance at your hands. They're calloused, nails uneven. If you're a peasant bride, there's no manicure waiting for you. Just a quick rinse with cold water and the hope that your nails don't look like they've been in a fistfight with a plough. And there's no mirror. If you want to check your reflection, you'll have to go to the bucket outside and stare into the water and pray the chickens haven't already fouled it. Outside, you hear voices. Your mother, your aunt, arguing about dowry paperwork, bread rolls, and whether you should wear the blessed ribbon from Aunt Hilda or the one that didn't fall in the fireplace. Someone's already yelling about goats. Someone else is weeping softly, possibly out of joy. Possibly because your cousin dropped the cheese wheel again. And you're expected to look grateful, because this is a good match, remember? Whether you're marrying into a slightly wealthier family with 2 pigs instead of 1, or you're finally securing your father's rights to the southern field, or just because the village priest said it was time, this is not your moment. This is your family's moment, their reputation, their future, their livestock negotiations. You don't speak. Not because you're shy, but because your opinion hasn't been requested. Not yet. Someone knocks on the wooden slat that functions as your door. Your older sister, probably. She's here to help you get ready, which means she'll tie your belt so tight it feels like a corset made of emotional trauma, and whisper some barely helpful advice about acting obedient, but not too obedient. She's been married 5 years. Her husband has a large nose, 3 teeth, and a suspicious boil. She tells you you're lucky. You try to believe her. If you're a noble, the mattress is stuffed with feathers, but it's still cold. The room is larger, but colder. And you're not alone either. You're never alone. There are servants in the corner helping you dress. One's brushing your hair with a carved wooden comb that yanks out strands with brutal efficiency. Another's adjusting your veil or polishing your boots, and yet another is whispering instructions on how to behave during the ceremony, instructions you've heard 1,000 times. Don't look down. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't faint, even if the incense is overpowering. Smile, but not too much. You're a dignified bride, not a tavern wench. And if you're a groom, you're probably being scrubbed by your brothers with cold water and mockery. They've tied some unlucky trinket to your belt. One of them shoves a cup of beer in your hand. It's barely past dawn. There's no first look, no first dance, just a first transaction. And everyone's watching. Even if you're poor, the entire village knows it's your wedding day. They saw the banns posted on the church door. They heard the gossip. They're planning to show up not to celebrate you, but because weddings mean food. Not a feast, but something slightly better than gruel. Maybe a bit of cheese. A few hard rolls. Honeyed oats, if someone's splurging. Back in your room, your hands shake slightly. You don't know this person well. Maybe you've spoken once. Maybe you saw each other at market. Maybe this is someone you've never seen without a hood on. And in a few hours, they'll be your spouse. Legally, spiritually, socially, irrevocably. You look out the slit in the wall again. It's still grey. A rooster crows. The priest is already at the church. And your family? They're assembling. You don't have much time to prepare. No vows to write. No speeches. No ring bearer. Just the heavy fabric of your family's expectations draped around your shoulders like wet wool. You stand. Today, you're not just getting married. You're becoming part of someone else's legacy, like it or not. You're getting married today. That's the plan. But before anyone can wed anyone, you need to do two things. Eat and try to be less disgusting. Neither will be pleasant. Let's start with hygiene. There's no soap waiting by the sink because there's no sink, no bathroom, no hot water, unless someone boiled it for you over a smoky hearth. And if they did, you'd better get to it before your siblings wash their feet in it. You spot the basin, a cracked ceramic bowl filled with cold water that looks questionable. It's more grey than clear. It's shared, and someone's already used it. You can tell because it has that telltale greasy film of last night's face and maybe a turnip. There's a rag hanging over the edge, damp, scratchy, and undoubtedly communal. You dip your hands in, instantly regret it. The water is ice cold and smells faintly of yesterday's stew. You try to splash your face. It feels more like punishment than refreshment. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no gentle cinnamon mint foam. If you're lucky and rich, you might have a twig soaked in ash and herbs. You chew it and use the frayed end to scrub your teeth. But honestly, that's a noble's habit. You run your finger along your teeth. Maybe rinse your mouth with a splash of vinegar or stale ale. That's it. Medieval dental care is mostly wishful thinking and avoiding hard bread, so your molars don't evacuate mid-chew. You smell your armpits. Bad idea. It's a rich bouquet of old wool, damp earth, and something floral only because you slept near a lavender bundle last Tuesday. As for bathing, that's a seasonal activity. If it's summer, maybe you dunked yourself in the river recently. If it's winter like today, then your body is mostly covered in a protective crust of grime, smoke, and sweat. A medieval shield against both disease and dignity. Deodorant doesn't exist. Perfume only for the wealthy. Most people just wear their body odor like an ancestral curse. If you're a noble, your attendants might have dusted your skin with ground herbs or dabbed rosewater behind your ears, but even then, you're still mostly just layered in fabric and optimism. You try not to scratch too much. You don't want to look itchy in your wedding portrait, not that there will be one. The only record of today's ceremony will be a scribble in the church ledger and a smudge on your family's memory. With personal hygiene complete, it's time for breakfast. Or, more accurately, the daily exercise in disappointment that medieval people called breakfast. You're led to the common room, a smoky, low-ceilinged space lit by the morning sun, the fireplace, and the glowing shame of boiled barley. There's no feast waiting for you, just a wooden bowl filled with pottage, a gluey, beige substance that's been slowly decomposing on the fire for at least 4 days. Pottage isn't food. It's a lifestyle. Oats, barley, maybe a chunk of turnip, maybe a beet that lost its will to live. The same pot has been scraped, refilled, and stirred so many times it has its own personality. You swallow it with quiet resolve and zero joy. If you're poor, there's no meat, not even a whiff of it. Just vegetables, grains, and the occasional rat that fell in and became protein. If you're lucky, someone added a splash of ale to thin it out. On the side, bread. Not the warm, crusty kind you dream of. This is hard, dark, and slightly damp. It's made from coarse rye or barley mixed with sawdust, leftover grain husks, and despair. It's so dense, it could be used as a weapon. You don't bite it, you gnaw on it like an animal working through a moral crisis. Butter? Only if you've sinned less than usual. Cheese? Maybe a crumb or two if your uncle didn't eat it already. Fruit? Not unless it's dried, shriveled, or fermented into something resembling wine. And yes, let's talk about what you drink. Not water. Never water. Medieval water is a microbial lottery, and no one wins. Instead, you're handed a mug of small beer, a weak ale brewed to be safe enough to drink but barely alcoholic. It's cloudy, lukewarm, and smells like someone stored it in a boot. Children drink it too. It's normal. Hydration is hydration, even if it tastes like disappointment. If you're upper class, maybe you get a bit of wine with herbs or a cup of watered-down milk. But for most people, breakfast comes with exactly one drink option: ale that's too tired to be beer and too brave to be water. You eat in silence because your mouth is busy trying to chew something that could double as roofing material. Conversation is minimal. Everyone's watching you, the bride, the groom, everyone evaluating your face, your manners, your chewing, because everything matters today. If you slurp, someone will whisper about it until you die. If you drop your spoon, it's a sign. If you eat too fast, you're greedy. If you don't eat, you're ungrateful. And you need energy, because the wedding isn't until midday. Between now and then, there are cows to be fed, clothes to be fixed, people to be placated, and several arguments over dowry items that were promised, forgotten, or miscounted. You try to swallow your last bite of bread and find it stuck in your throat. No one offers you water, just more ale. You chase it down with a grimace. The bowl is empty. You've eaten. You're clean by medieval standards. And now you're ready. Sort of. The priest has been waiting. The neighbors have gathered. The dowry chest has been loaded. And in a few hours, you'll be legally and spiritually bound to someone you might not even know the last name of, assuming they have a last name. But first, you have to finish tying your belt and try not to throw up the pottage. You are about to be married, which means today you wear your best, not your finest, because you don't own anything fine, just your least miserable clothing. The one outfit that hasn't yet been worn to a funeral, a field, or a flood. It's been hanging on the wall peg overnight, trying to shake off the mold. Your sister brushed it with a stiff bristle broom, muttering that you'll look presentable if people don't stand too close. Let's get dressed. If you're the bride, your dress, the word gown is far too generous, is made of wool. Thick, scratchy, heavy wool. It doesn't flow as you walk. It drags. There's no zipper. No lacing up with the help of a giggling maid. You have to pull it on like a reluctant burlap sock. It's dyed with local plants, maybe woad, maybe onion skins, and it's faded in strange places from sun, sweat, and rain. The sleeves are long, not for fashion, but to hide the burns and bruises that come from a lifetime of cooking over an open hearth. You tie it at the waist with a belt of rope or twine. Maybe there's a pouch tied to it, filled with something romantic like turnip seeds, or a single copper coin. Underneath, you're wearing a linen shift if your family could afford one. Otherwise, it's wool on skin, and the itching has become part of your personality. Shoes? You might not have any. If you do, they're made of rough leather, barely stitched, with thin soles that offer all the protection of damp cardboard. If it rains, and it always feels like it might, your feet will be wet within the hour. Jewelry? Perhaps a wooden brooch. Maybe a ribbon. If you're lucky, a family heirloom that survived 3 plagues and a barn fire. Your hair is braided and wrapped in a veil or a coif, a linen head covering that's more practical than pretty. In some regions, you must cover your head now, not because it's fashionable, but because you're about to become someone's wife, and wives are expected to hide their hair, their thoughts, and occasionally their opinions. Your entire look says, "I am dressed for marriage and marginal survival." If you're the groom, your best tunic is only slightly too small, stretched tight across your back from years of hauling firewood. The neckline is fraying, the cuffs are stained, and the color, originally a bold brown, now resembles dirty snow. You pull on your breeches. They're laced at the waist and haven't been washed in at least 3 saints' feast days. You sniff them, regret it. Over the tunic, you might wear a sleeveless surcoat, something to indicate the occasion. It's not lined, it's not warm, it's just slightly less offensive looking than your work clothes. Your hose-tight wool leg coverings are held up with string or prayer. One side sags, the other cuts off circulation. That's just how they fit. You're not sure which side is more uncomfortable. And your shoes? They're stitched from thick hide, water-damaged, and flat as a plank. They squeak when you walk, which is great, because people will need to hear you coming down the aisle. There are no musicians. You try to smooth your hair with a splash of beer. It doesn't help. You check your belt pouch, still empty, just like your hopes of a honeymoon. Now that you're dressed, where will you live? After the ceremony, assuming you survive the pottage, the priest, and the judgmental stares, you'll be expected to settle down into your home. Let's define that term, shall we? If you're poor, which you are, home means a one-room hut made of mud, sticks, straw, and prayers. It leans slightly, like it's deeply considering collapse. The walls are wattle and daub, wooden slats covered in mud, mixed with straw, animal dung, and desperate optimism. In summer, they sweat. In winter, they freeze. All year, they smell. The roof is thatched. It leaks. You'll discover the leaks during your first night together. Romantic, right? Nothing sets the mood like rain dripping on your blanket and a mouse watching from the rafters. Inside, there's one main space, maybe a loft above for storage or for children when they inevitably arrive too soon and in multiples. The bed is a wooden frame or just a pile of straw in the corner, shared by both of you, a few insects, and possibly a visiting cousin. The floor is dirt, packed earth, slightly moist, and prone to collecting everything from mud to goat droppings to spilled soup. If you're lucky, someone put down rushes a mat of dried plants meant to absorb the filth. They'll rot within the month. There's a fire pit in the center of the room. No chimney. The smoke just floats, hangs, lingers. Your lungs will get used to it. Or not. There's one door, no windows. A wooden shutter might cover a small hole in the wall if the wind doesn't steal it first. Privacy? None. Soundproofing? Absolutely not. If you cough, the whole village hears it. If you argue, they hear that too. And when your in-laws visit, and they will, there's nowhere to hide. Your home is theirs, now. And your life? No longer your own. If you're a bit wealthier, maybe you live in a cottage. 2 rooms. One for sleeping, one for everything else. It still has a dirt floor, but there might be actual furniture, a table, a stool, maybe even a chest for your clothes, which you will continue to share because you only own 2 outfits between you. If you're noble, you live in a stone manor. Sounds fancy, right? Except that stone doesn't insulate, it just stores coal. Like a medieval refrigerator you can't escape from. Your bed is bigger, yes. There's a mattress, stuffed with feathers, maybe. But there are also lice, ticks, and at least one squirrel living in the wall. You have servants but no plumbing, fireplaces but poor ventilation, and in-laws who are even more entitled. And no matter where you live, one fact remains. This is your home now. This is where you'll eat, sleep, work, argue, make children, lose children, store onions, and age 30 years in the next 10. There's no just getting started. In medieval marriage, the beginning is the middle. There is no planning for later. There is only now. And the roof that's already leaking on your wedding blanket. So smile, someone's at the door, and it's time to walk to church. So, you've been married for approximately 12 hours. The priest has blessed your union, your in-laws have judged your posture, and your wedding blanket already has a suspicious stain from a leaking roof tile. Now what? Time to start your life together, which means back to work. Because in the Middle Ages, marriage didn't signal the start of a romantic getaway. It signaled the merging of two labor units into a single, exhausted survival team. And if you thought love was hard, try hauling firewood in January. First light, you wake before sunrise. Not because you're motivated, because the rooster is screaming again, because your back hurts, because your feet are cold and your face is colder, and because if you don't start the fire soon, you won't be able to cook the breakfast porridge, which is mostly yesterday's porridge, reheated over an open flame and flavored with a dash of wood smoke and sadness. There is no sleeping in, no personal time, no lazy Sundays. Go. Every day is a work day, especially after marriage. You throw on the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before. Your spouse does the same. There's no changing outfits, no hair routine, no skincare ritual. You rinse your face with cold water if any's left in the bucket. If not, congratulations, today begins with a hike to the nearest stream. One of you goes out to chop wood. The other starts kneading dough. Because bread doesn't bake itself, and fire doesn't just happen. Everything in your life must be built, boiled, fetched, or fixed. Nothing arrives pre-packaged. Your jobs? All of them. If you're a man, your expected duties include chopping firewood, hauling water, repairing fences, fixing the roof with twine and fear, plowing fields with a plow that's barely a plow, digging trenches for drainage, shooing away foxes that eat your chickens, walking 5 miles to borrow a goat because your own died of something with no name. You work from sunrise to sunset, breaking only to shovel food into your face with fingers that haven't felt clean since last Easter. If you're a woman, your day looks like baking bread, brewing weak beer, feeding chickens, sheep, pigs, or all three if they haven't frozen overnight, washing clothes in river water with lye soap that stings like betrayal, mending every piece of clothing with thread salvaged from other rags, tending to children, sick in-laws, and neighbors who won't stop asking for onions, collecting herbs for medicine and spices you'll never taste, also spinning wool, always spinning, always, even while walking, even while lecturing your youngest for feeding bread to the dog again. And if you're a noble, you still work, just differently. You oversee the manor, manage supplies, handle disputes between serfs, and ensure your household runs like a poorly funded kingdom. You might have servants, but they're as overworked as you are, and they'll remind you of it by sighing very loudly while polishing the same goblet for 4 hours. Your husband is likely managing the estate, overseeing crops, collecting rents, and failing at falconry. Or he's been called to fight in someone else's war, leaving you to hold the keys and keep the servants from stealing the silver. Tools of the trade, or torture. Your tools are made of wood and iron, heavy, dull, and almost always broken. You sharpen blades yourself. You make rope from hemp. You fix cracked buckets with bits of leather and desperation. Want to wash clothes? Here's a plank, a river, and your own sore knuckles. Want to carry water? Here's a yoke and 2 sloshing pails that will soak your only tunic before you make it halfway home. Want to make dinner? First, you have to light the fire, then grind the grain, then boil the water. Then try not to cry when the potatoes are moldy and the neighbor's cow ate your cabbage again. Even leisure is labor. Spinning yarn, darning socks, whittling, shelling peas. There is no such thing as doing nothing, only doing less visible work. your boss? Nature. The sun is your clock. The seasons are your contract. Winter is your mortal enemy. Rain means mud. Mud means collapsed roofs and soggy thatch. Snow means starvation. Summer brings flies, plague, spoiled food, and the smell of old cheese in your clothes. A hot day might kill your ox. A cold night might kill your baby. You can't plan around it. You just brace for it and hope. There's no vacation. There's no retirement. You work until your body stops or someone else's does. Help from your spouse? If you're lucky, you married someone with a decent work ethic and a kind disposition. If not, you're in a legally binding, lifelong partnership with someone who might nap through the grain harvest and leave you to dig a latrine trench alone. Medieval marriage vows? They didn't say for better or worse as poetic filler. They said it because worse was basically guaranteed. You work beside your spouse, sometimes wordlessly, sometimes bickering about the correct way to thatch a roof or butcher a goose. Your bodies become synchronized machines not out of romance, but out of sheer repetitive necessity. Romantic gestures come in the form of letting your spouse have the bigger bowl of soup, not blaming them when the bread burns, sharing a warm blanket instead of two cold ones. That's love, medieval style. When things go wrong, if your ox dies, you haul the plow yourself. If your spouse gets sick, you work double. If the roof collapses, you sleep under it anyway. If the well dries up, you walk farther. There is no insurance, no backup plan, no government safety net. Your entire life is work. Your entire marriage is built on whether or not you can survive it together or in spite of each other. And most of the time, you do. Not because it's easy, but because you don't have a choice. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you die. Welcome to medieval marriage, where survival is the romance. You and your new spouse have survived the ceremony, the pottage, and your first night beneath a roof made of thatch, smoke, and promises. Congratulations, you're married. But in medieval Europe, you're not just husband and wife. You're spiritually entangled in a three-way marriage, you, your spouse, and God. Possibly several saints, a relic or two, and a local priest with very strong opinions about your bedroom schedule. Religion isn't a part of life in the Middle Ages. It is life. From the moment you're born, baptized, and slapped with a Christian name, your every action, including marriage, is judged not just by your community, but by the heavens themselves. Marriage isn't a social contract. It's a sacred bond, watched over by angels, enforced by the church, and recorded by a monk who hasn't smiled in 17 years. And yes, that includes everything you do in private, especially what you do in private. Your marriage was never your idea. In most cases, your marriage was arranged or encouraged not by love, but by duty to your family, your land, your community, and ultimately to God's plan. The church believed marriage existed for three holy purposes: to make more people, legitimately, to prevent sin, mostly yours, to reflect the union between Christ and the church, which, by the way, also wasn't very romantic. If your marriage had some happiness in it, that was fine, but it wasn't the goal. Love was a bonus, like a second egg in your porridge. Unexpected, not required. The wedding itself was a holy act. You didn't need a banquet, or a ring, or even a fancy dress, but you did need a priest, a public declaration, and a total lack of existing spouses. The church was very clear: no polygamy, no marrying close relatives, no secret backyard weddings without witnesses. You needed banns read in church 3 Sundays in a row. You needed approval. You needed to swear your vows publicly, preferably on sacred ground. Why? Because marriage was not a private agreement. It was a visible, trackable, religious sacrament like baptism or confession, except with more dowry arguments and occasional livestock. Your wedding night? Also regulated. Let's talk intimacy. The church had thoughts, so many thoughts, detailed, uncomfortable, heavily sermonized thoughts. In theory, you were supposed to come together in mutual respect, solemnity, and a total absence of enthusiasm. Passion was frowned upon. Desire was tolerated barely. And pleasure? Suspicious. Missionary position only. No improvisation. No surprises. No weird noises. And timing? Critical. There were entire calendars listing when it was sinful to be intimate with your spouse. Not on Sundays. Not on Fridays. Day of penance. Not on Wednesdays. Suspicious for unknown reasons. Not during Lent. Not during Advent. Not before communion. Not during a feast day. Not during her period. Not while pregnant. Not after childbirth. Not if the moon looked funny. That left, perhaps, one Tuesday in April, and even that was probably cancelled by a saint's martyrdom. If you broke these rules, confession. Immediately to a priest who might ask extremely detailed questions about what happened, how, when, and whether your toes were pointed in a spiritually acceptable direction. And yes, this included married couples. You might be wed in the eyes of God, but that didn't mean God wasn't side-eyeing your sheets. Superstition filled in the gaps. Beyond church doctrine, medieval people lived with a constant low-level buzz of magical fear. You're always looking over your shoulder, not just for the devil, but for omen. Bad weather on your wedding day, a sign your marriage will be cursed. Drop the wedding bread. Infertility. Dog howling during the vows. Death. A candle blowing out on its own. Witchcraft. People believed in saints, yes, but they also believed in witches, demons, fairies, and curses. If your baby came out with a birthmark, it might be seen as a mark of sin. If your crops failed, maybe your neighbor hexed you because you refused to share your goat cheese. There were protective charms stitched into clothing, holy medals worn in secret, herbs scattered around the marriage bed to ward off evil spirits and in-laws. And if your marriage went badly, if your spouse fell ill or strayed or simply started looking at you like you were yesterday's barley stew, you might seek help from a local wise woman, from a charm, from a whispered prayer carved into a candle and buried under the hearthstone. You loved your God. You also feared your grandmother's cursed comb. Women were the moral gatekeepers. If you're a medieval woman, you don't just represent your family anymore. You represent spiritual purity. You're expected to be chaste before marriage, obedient during it, and saintly after childbirth. You must be devoted, modest, quiet, tireless, and preferably invisible when men are talking about theology. The Virgin Mary is your example. And let's be honest, that's a tough act to follow. You're not just a wife. You're a moral compass for the entire household. If anything goes wrong, husband drinks too much, child misbehaves, goat dies mysteriously, the blame may quietly drift toward you because clearly you haven't been praying hard enough. Husbands, less holy, more forgiven. Men had expectations too. They were supposed to provide, defend, lead. But if they cheated, drank too much, neglected their prayers, the church frowned, but looked the other way far more often. A man who wandered into a tavern brothel after a hard day of field labor might be chastised. A woman who was suspected of flirting with the baker's son might be exiled. God was watching everyone, but he seemed to judge women a little more loudly. Death was always there. And here's the thing no one said out loud, but everyone knew. Your marriage was temporary, not by choice, but by plague, by childbirth, by accident, by infection. The church taught that marriage was for life, but life was short, sometimes shockingly short. You were expected to make your peace with death from the first day. So you lived in spiritual readiness. You confessed often. You made wills early. You baptized your babies fast, just in case. You prayed. You crossed yourself before every journey. You lit candles. You wept. You hoped. Your marriage was sacred, but also fragile. Like life, like everything. You're married. Officially, legally, spiritually. Now what? You eat. Together. Repeatedly. Sometimes with joy, often with caution, and occasionally while side-eyeing a suspiciously grey piece of pork and whispering to your spouse. Do you think that's moving? Because in the Middle Ages, every meal is a test of trust, skill, and digestive resilience. Breakfast? Already suffered that. You've already endured the watery pottage and the bread that could be used as a murder weapon. But now it's midday time for dinner, which is actually lunch, because medieval people name meals like they name their kids, inconsistently and with little regard for clarity. Let's set the table. Wait, there is no table. If you're poor, you eat sitting on a bench, on the ground, or by the fire. You hold your bowl in one hand and your wooden spoon in the other, and you pray the dog doesn't steal your last turnip while you're chewing. There are no forks. You eat with a spoon and your fingers, 3 fingers, specifically because using all 5 is considered uncouth. Not that it matters. You haven't trimmed your nails in weeks and they look like talons from a bird that regrets every decision it ever made. So, what's for dinner? Potage. Again, but slightly thicker this time. Possibly with beans, possibly with meat, if something died recently, intentionally or otherwise. And not all meat is equal. Beef? Luxury. Mutton? Expensive. Goat? Doable. Rat? It's protein. Shut up and eat. Pig? Delicious. But only if you're not fasting, which you probably are, because the church declared half the calendar off limits to joy. Your meals are seasonal. In winter, it's turnips and onions. In summer, it's peas and regret. If someone has access to a spice, maybe pepper, cinnamon, or saffron, it means they're either a merchant, a noble, or a heretic. Spices are expensive. They're basically edible wealth. Bread is everywhere, but not soft, fluffy bread. Think dark, dense, sour, and tough. A medieval loaf could double as a roof tile. Sometimes, stale bread is used as a trencher, a flat, edible plate. At the end of the meal, you feed it to the poor or your pig. Same difference. Cheese is common, but usually sharp, dry, and slightly offensive. Eggs are a treat. Butter is a dream. Honey is sacred. Fruit, only in season, and usually cooked. Raw fruit is considered dangerous. Why? Because medieval people assume that anything juicy and sweet is probably cursed. Makes sense. Dessert? If you're rich, candied almonds, figs, or spiced wine. If you're not, sleep and wishful thinking. Drinks? Water is basically poison, unless it comes from a sacred spring or a very optimistic monk. So you drink ale warm, flat, and made by your wife in a barrel that once stored questionable fish. It's weak enough that even children drink it. But don't be fooled. Drink enough, and your husband will be trying to serenade a goose by evening. If you're wealthy, you might drink wine. But not clear, crisp, fragrant wine. No, it's thick, gritty, possibly spiced, and often mixed with water to cleanse it, which is hilarious, considering the water isn't clean either. Sometimes it's better not to ask, eating together, but not as equals. At your table, hierarchy matters. If you're nobility, you and your spouse may sit together, though possibly in silence, flanked by retainers, servants, or in-laws with political agendas. Men sit first, women serve. Children stand unless spoken to. If a priest visits, he gets the best seat, the warmest food, and none of the gossip, at least to his face. If you're poor, you eat in shifts, or, out of the same pot or whatever hasn't been stolen by your cousin's kids, who never stop showing up just to say hello. Quote, and you don't speak freely at the table. You don't complain. You don't pick out the mushrooms. You eat what's given, give thanks, and spend the rest of the meal chewing quietly and trying to identify what you're swallowing. If something tastes funny, too bad. That was probably your one decent calorie today. And when you're done eating, it's time for entertainment, which is a strong word. There's no Netflix, no books, unless you're wealthy and literate, no board games unless you carve your own pieces out of bones and really like dice. So what do? 1. The tavern, if you're a man. Men gather at the local alehouse. They drink small beer, argue about sheep, complain about taxes, and try not to accidentally marry the barmaid. The tavern is loud, smoky, smelly, and crowded, but it's freedom. Your wife doesn't like it. She knows what goes on there. Gossip, fights, occasionally dancing, and someone always sings a song about a knight who lost his pants and blamed the church. If you're the wife, you stay home. The tavern is not for you, unless you work there. 2. The market. Sometimes entertainment just means going into town. You walk with your spouse and dodge pigs, carts, and small children throwing things. The market is chaotic, but lively, full of smells, shouts, produce, gossip, and the occasional juggler who's also a thief. You buy things, or look at things, or talk about how expensive everything island. If you're a woman, this is your chance to be seen, to show your new marriage face. You smile, you nod, you compare cheese, you pretend you're not freezing and deeply constipated. 3. Festivals. Finally, some fun. Medieval life is hard, but it's peppered with feast days often tied to saints, seasonal changes, or agricultural milestones. At a festival, you and your spouse eat slightly better food, drink much stronger ale, and dance in a circle with people who absolutely do not know the steps. There's music, bagpipes, flutes, maybe a drum, and sometimes a play with actors wearing masks made of old cloth and anxiety. It's chaotic, unrefined, briefly joyful. You hold your spouse's hand, just for a moment, and for that hour, you're not working, you're not hungry, you're just married. And that might be enough. See, the church. Don't forget, entertainment also includes sermons, chanting, and public penance. Sunday Mass is mandatory. So is confession. And on special days, you might get to watch a public flogging, a morality play, or the excommunication of a guy who stole too many ducks. It's social. It's dramatic. It's heavily censored, but it's something. And then it's night again, and you do it all again tomorrow. You and your spouse eating from the same pot, dodging spoiled food, whispering gossip, counting coins, and dreaming of a summer where the barley doesn't rot and the beer doesn't taste like feet. You don't go on dates. You don't surprise each other with gifts. You survive. And occasionally you share a laugh over a burned onion. And somehow, that's enough. You've survived another day together. You've mended clothes, boiled barley, fought about who forgot to feed the chickens, and silently debated whether your spouse's feet are just smelly or infected. Because in medieval marriage, illness isn't an inconvenience. It's a threat, a ticking clock, an expected guest, and it always comes too soon. First symptom? Panic. Let's say your spouse starts coughing, not a little polite throat clear. No, a real, deep, phlegm-dragging cough that echoes off the stone walls and makes you stop stirring the stew. You freeze. You look over. Your heart sinks, because in the Middle Ages, a cough isn't just a cough. It could be tuberculosis, plague, pneumonia, or a simple cold that mutates into something lethal because your entire house is made of mold, rat droppings, and unwashed linens. Your first instinct? Prayer. Your second? Panic. Your third? Try not to show it, because if you panic, your spouse will panic, and your neighbors will panic, and before you know it, no one will touch your barley, and the priest will be sharpening his last rites bell. What's the plan? You don't call a doctor. There's no doctor. Not in your village. You might have a local healer who also sells chickens, a wise woman who's either a miracle worker or one bad outcome away from being called a witch, a traveling barber surgeon who owns one rusty knife and a terrifying smile, or a monk who'll prescribe prayer, fasting, and a poultice made from mashed leeks and goat fat. You choose the healer. She arrives with a bag of herbs, a worried frown, and a jar of something that smells like spoiled hope. She checks your spouse's pulse, feels the forehead, listens to the breathing. She whispers, "It's in the lungs." That's not helpful. That's terrifying. You offer her bread and a bit of cheese for the treatment. She accepts. Then she pulls out the remedy, a mustard plaster, a garlic and honey infusion, maybe bloodletting. If she's feeling ambitious, you pretend to trust her, because what else can you do? Illness is a family affair. When one person gets sick, everyone is at risk. You and your spouse share a bed, a bowl, a bucket, and about 700 airborne droplets per sneeze. There's no quarantine. There's no Lysol. You can't just sleep in the guest room. Your house is the guest room. The kitchen, the bathroom, and the sick ward all in one damp, drafty, infected square. So you start boiling everything. Blankets, water, herbs, your patience. You sleep less. You primor. You start to notice symptoms yourself. Are you really tired? Or is that the beginning of the thing? Your neighbors find out. They always do. Some bring food. Others bring judgment. A few bring relics, saint bones and fragments of robes, believed to heal, or at least buy time. But all of them keep their distance, just in case. Medicine. Hope with a side of suffering. Here's what medicine looks like in your world. Bloodletting to balance your humors. Using a knife, leech, or a friendly neighborhood lunatic. Herbal brews, which taste like sadness and pond water. Poultices made from breadcrumbs, pig fat, and secret forest leaves. Charms tied around the neck. Relics kissed with trembling lips. Smoke to cleanse the room. Candles burned at the foot of the bed. Whispers late at night when your spouse doesn't look like they'll wake up. Doctors, the few that exist, charge a fortune, and most of them learned medicine by reading Galen, who lived over 1,000 years ago and once suggested treating epilepsy with roasted mouse. You do what you can. You cool the fever with cold cloths. You hold their hand. You lie. You'll feel better by tomorrow. And then there's childbirth. If you're a wife, illness isn't just seasonal. It's scheduled, because every pregnancy is a gamble. Every birth is a roll of the dice with death. There's no anesthesia, no antiseptic, no trained obstetrician. Just a few women from the village who've done this before, some successfully. You lie on a straw-stuffed mattress. You scream into a cloth. You bleed. A lot. Sometimes the baby lives. Sometimes you both do. Sometimes you don't. And if you survive, your body will never be the same. Your marriage will never be the same. Because now there's another mouth to feed another life, to protect in a world where medicine is mostly hope dressed up in herbs and superstition. If death comes, the priest is called. He brings holy water and a sense of finality. Your spouse is given last rites. A cross is pressed into their hand. A candle is lit. You hold their other hand. You whisper apologies. You say things you meant to say on your wedding day but didn't, because back then you thought you'd have time. But medieval marriage doesn't come with guarantees. You're not promised 50 years. and a peaceful retirement. You're promised nothing, except that love, real love, might mean holding a bowl under someone's chin as they vomit, wiping their brow, feeding them broth, and telling them they're going to live even when you both know they won't. And if they die, you dig a shallow grave, you wear black, you cry, you remarry, eventually. Because you have to, because no one survives alone. Not here, not now. Not in a world where death is always in the room waiting, watching, respectful, and relentless. You've been married for a while now. You've weathered a winter together. Maybe two. You've shared meals, whispered prayers, whispered insults, and maybe, on a good day, shared a laugh while the goat tried to eat your laundry. But now your marriage has grown, not just in age, in weight. Because family life in medieval times isn't a soft focus painting of smiling children and tender embraces by the fire. It's exhaustion, obligation, fragile hope. And if you're a woman, it's a full-time job you never applied for and can't resign from. Your role as a wife. You wake early always to feed your household. That includes your husband, your children, any relatives who've moved in, the occasional wandering priest, and the dog, if he hasn't already stolen your bread. Then you work all day. No one asks if you're tired. Your job includes cooking, cleaning, spinning, mending, brewing, tending animals, hauling water, comforting sick children, and silently calculating how to make half a loaf of bread last until Friday. You might also be a midwife, a healer, a field hand during harvest, a trader at market, a nurse to your in-laws, a teacher to your children. But none of these come with titles. You're just wife, which means everything. And if your husband complains the pottage tastes like dirt, you smile, because he's technically not wrong. Your role as a mother. If you're married, children are expected, required, demanded, hoped for, feared. You don't get to decide if you'll be a mother. You just wait for the signs, the missed bleedings, the swelling, the nausea, the breathless fear. Pregnancy is private and public all at once. Everyone watches your belly. Everyone judges. And once the child is born, your real work begins. But not with celebration, with suspicion, because not all children survive. And in the Middle Ages, people notice, if a baby dies, was it natural? Was it sin? Was it the evil eye? Was it your punishment for being prideful? Did you breastfeed too soon? Too late? Did you anger a saint? There's no instruction manual, just feed the baby. Keep it warm. Hope it doesn't get sick. Hope the priest is nearby if it does. You nurse your child. You sing to them if you have the energy. You rock them with arms sore from grinding grain. If they live past 5, that's considered a win. If they live to 10, a miracle. But they won't stay children for long. Childhood does last. By the age of 6 or 7, your child, boy or girl, is working. If you're a peasant, boys herd animals, chop wood, run errands. Girls fetch water, spin thread, help with meals, care for younger siblings. By 12, they're practically small adults. And by 14, they're old enough to marry. Yes, your daughter might soon be someone else's wife. Just like you. She'll be nervous. You'll braid her hair and lie about how it gets easier. Your son might be apprenticed to a blacksmith, sent off to serve in a noble house, or join the local militia. He may never come back. You tell yourself it's a good match, a good opportunity. But at night, when the fire's low, you wonder if this is how your own mother felt, watching you disappear into someone else's house, someone else's rules, someone else's bed. Family life is a team sport of survival. Your family isn't just you, your spouse, and your kids. It includes elderly parents who can no longer walk but still tell you how to churn butter correctly, widowed sisters with nowhere else to go, cousins who claim to be just visiting and stay for 3 months, possibly a farmhand, and a pig, maybe two. You all live in 1 or 2 rooms. Privacy is a memory. Arguments are constant. Someone is always snoring, coughing, singing, crying, or boiling something that smells like sin. You don't get space. You don't get silence. You get togetherness, the medieval kind, which means too many people and not enough spoons. And yet, you know each other deeply. You read your husband's moods before he speaks. You can soothe your baby while stirring soup and swatting flies. You notice when your eldest son looks pale before he says a word. Your life is noisy, crowded, smelly, exhausting, but it's yours. Women in power quiet, relentless, unseen. Despite what the priest says, women run things. Not officially, not loudly, but constantly. You make the house function. You know how many onions are left. You remember which herbs help with coughs. You know which neighbor gossips and which one helps without asking. You know how to stretch one chicken over 3 meals. You know your husband's pride better than he does, when to let him feel useful, when to take over quietly. You're not allowed to preach or judge or lead men, but you lead anyway behind the curtain, beside the cradle, beneath the weight of the world. And if your husband dies, you don't cry for long. You find the next step. You carry your children, you gather wood, you go on, because you have to, because that's what women do, not just in marriage, but in life. And somehow, there is love. It's not always passionate, not always soft, but sometimes your husband laughs at your joke. Sometimes your child sings to themselves in the corner, and you pause, listening. Sometimes your daughter curls into your side and asks if heaven smells like bread, and for a moment, just a moment, you feel something bright inside your chest. Not joy, not peace, but maybe love. Medieval love, tired, scarred, loyal, and real. The sun is past its peak. The shadows are growing longer. You've eaten your bread, or what passed for it, scrubbed the cooking pot, cursed the goat for knocking over your only broom. And now you work again, because the day isn't done, and neither are the problem. Afternoon in a medieval marriage isn't about sitting together on the porch, sipping ale and watching the Sunday. It's about scraping through the second half of the day while dealing with neighbors, rivals, rules, and the constant threat of public embarrassment. Back to work with more blisters. Once the midday meal is cleared, you and your spouse go right back into the fields, the forge, the shop, or the spinning stool. If you're peasants, he's harvesting grain, chopping wood, or chasing the pig that escaped again. You're milking goats, patching clothes, or squinting in the fading light to repair a broken shoe with twine and muttered insults. If you're artisans, he's hammering metal, you're carding wool and managing the accounts in your head. If you're noble, you're managing servants who pretend to listen. Your spouse is probably at court pretending to be important. But no matter your class, afternoon is when tensions rise. The day's long, people are tired, tempers flare, and small problems feel like the end of the world. And sometimes they are. Gossip is a weapon. In a medieval village, everyone knows everything, or at least they think they do, and if they don't, they invent it. Someone saw your husband talking to the miller's daughter. That will circulate before sunset. Your neighbor swears he saw your wife pour milk on the threshold to curse his cow. It becomes fact by dinner. You're accused of theft, laziness, pride, sorcery, adultery, or worst of all, thinking you're better than others. You'll be judged for how fast your spouse walks home from the tavern, whether your child sneezes too much, if your bread rises strangely, if your face is too pale or too flushed, if your goat bleats too much. Yes, even the goat has enemies. You don't have privacy. You have reputation. And once it slips, it's hard to get back. Justice isn't fair. If someone accuses you or your spouse of wrongdoing, it won't be handled quietly. There's no private court. There's the manor court held under a tree or in a drafty hall by the local lord or steward, who may or may not be sober, literate, or fair. You're called forward. Your neighbors whisper. You may be fined. You may be shamed. You may be punished publicly. Some examples: fined for letting your pigs roam, fined for arguing in church, whipped for gossip, put in the stocks for theft or for just looking guilty, branded for repeat offenses, banished if you make too much trouble. And yes, married couples are punished together sometimes. If your spouse committed the crime and you allowed it, you suffer too. Solidarity, medieval style. Domestic disputes, public knowledge. Married couplers argue. That's not new. But in the Middle Ages, if your argument gets loud or violent, or even just entertaining enough, everyone will know, and they might intervene. There are documented punishments for quarrelsome wives, for lazy husbands, for those who insulted each other in public or refused to perform marital duties. There's a real risk of being labelled a scold, a nagging woman, often punished with a scold's bridle, a literal metal muzzle; a cuckold, a man whose wife strays; a heretic, if your fighting sounds too anti-church, or simply a bad Christian. And the church, it keeps note. Clergy often mediate marital disputes not with therapy, but with prayer, penance, or punishment. You may be told to sleep separately for a time, fast for 3 days, walk barefoot to a shrine together, confess. Again, married life is supposed to be holy. Fighting makes it suspicious. Class tensions boil beneath the surface. Let's say you're poor, your rent is late, your crops failed, and the steward of the Lord's manor just raised the tithe again. You're angry. So is your spouse. So is everyone you know. But you can't complain loudly. That's treason. You keep your voices low. You make snide comments at the market. You mutter during Mass. You and your spouse joke bitterly about selling the second best goat to pay for your own funeral, but you don't protest. Not really, because uprisings get crushed fast. So instead, you grumble and dream and drink, and sometimes you lash out at each other because it's safer than lashing out at your landlord. Violence happens. It's part of life. Afternoon brawls at the tavern. Field disputes that turn into scythe fights. Brothers-in-law throwing fists over a borrowed donkey. Sometimes it's petty, sometimes it's fatal, and sometimes it happens at home. Yes, medieval marriage included domestic violence. It was rarely punished unless it was public, extreme, or disrupted the community's peace. A black eye, a bruised rib, people noticed, but rarely intervened, because a man was considered head of the house, and the line between discipline and abuse was blurry by design. If the woman struck back, scandal. If neighbors complained, shame. There were exceptions. Communities did sometimes fine or shame violent spouses, but justice was erratic. Sympathy was thin. Survival came first. Silence came second. But community still exists. And here's the strange part. Despite all of this, the gossip, the fines, the judgment, your community is your lifeline. Your spouse's cousin helps rebuild the fence. The neighbor's daughter brings broth when you're sick. Someone lends you a chicken. You return the favor with thread, bread, or a place to sleep when their roof caves in. You share more than blood and tools. You share burdens. You grumble about each other. You pray for each other. You bury your dead together, because no one survives the afternoon alone, not in a medieval marriage, not in a medieval world. The sun is gone, the sky is ink, the fields have gone still, the animals settle, the village quiets, and somewhere in the distance, just barely, you hear the creak of a cartwheel turning after hours. Night has fallen, and if you're newly married, or married for years, you learn this quickly. The dark is not your friend. There are no street lamps, no night lights, No glow from a phone or a lantern on the porch. There is only firelight, if you can spare the wood. And shadows, so many shadows. And into those shadows, your fears walk. Lock the door, if you have one. Your house might have a door, a real one, made of heavy wood, with iron hinges and a latch. If you're lucky, if not, it's a slatted plank, maybe held closed with rope or a wooden bar across the frame. And even that might not keep anything or anyone out. You don't live in a world with police. You live in a world where justice is reactive, slow, and very public, which means crime is preventative. You rely on reputation, fear, superstition, and your neighbor's ears. If someone breaks in, you yell. You hope someone hears. You hope they help, but that's a lot of hope. So you listen, always, at night. You and your spouse lie side by side, ears straining for the creak of a footstep that doesn't belong. A snort from the pig outside is fine. A dog barking once is normal. But silence after a noise, that's when your heart starts racing. Because raiders, thieves, outlaws, they don't care about your marriage, your home, your family. They care about coin, food, warmth. And they know most villagers sleep hard, sleep deep, and don't lock their doors. You clutch the blanket tighter, not for warmth, for protection. Fire is friend and foe. Your hearth is glowing, barely. The coals crackle. The light dances. But if that fire dies completely, your house will grow colder than you can bear. And if it spreads, it will consume everything. Fire is the most common destroyer of medieval homes. One spark from the hearth, one overturned pot of fat, one gust of wind through the thatch. You might wake to heat, or smoke, or flame. And there's no fire department, just buckets, neighbors, and screaming. So before you sleep, you and your spouse bank the coals. You pile damp ash over the embers, whispering a prayer to Saint Florian, the patron of fire safety, even if no one told you his name. You hope the fire sleeps well, because if it doesn't, you won't wake up. The cold doesn't care about romance. You pull the blanket higher. It's wool, but thin, worn, shared between two bodies that haven't had a proper bath in weeks. Your feet brush against your spouse's icy, calloused, rough. You don't mind much, but you do mind the cold. It seeps through the stone walls, the wooden beams, the dirt floor. It fills your lungs, your bones, your joints. There's no insulation, no heating system, just blankets, bodies, breath. You sleep close, not always out of love, but out of necessity. Your child sleeps nearby, or between you. If the night is particularly cruel, you don't speak. You just listen to their breathing and pray it continues. In winter, the greatest victory is waking up. Dreams aren't safe. The church tells you that dreams are sometimes divine. Sometimes, other times, they're warnings. You dream of your mother's voice even though she died last year. You dream of fire, of blood, of shadows moving in the corner. And when you wake, heart racing, the dark looks back at you with quiet interest. You whisper a prayer. You touch the charm around your neck. You try not to think about what that sound was near the window. Spiritual fear is real. This isn't just physical. This is spiritual. Because at night, demons come. That's what the priests say. You've heard the stories. Witches flying on broomsticks. Spirits who visit sinners. Demons who sit on your chest. Women cursed to wander the woods forever, seeking lost children. Men who sleep too far from the fire and wake up wrong. You believe some of it. Not all, but enough to keep a candle burning longer than you should. Enough to hang rosemary above the door. Enough to mutter a quiet in nomen patris before closing your eyes. And your spouse? They snore beside you. Or they're still awake too, afraid to admit they're listening for the same things. Because no one wants to admit that night might win. Nightly visits the bad kind. If you're a woman, married to a man with power, or just with anger, the night brings other fears. He might touch you roughly. He might wake in a rage. He might whisper things that don't sound like his voice. You've learned how to calm him, or avoid him, or endure him. There's no law that protects you. No safe house. No midnight ride to a friend's spare bed. There's only dawn. You wait for it, sometimes bruised, sometimes relieved, sometimes wondering if this is still holy matrimony. Sometimes you don't wake up. People die at night, quietly, often, of fever, of cold, of childbirth, of infection. One moment they're breathing, the next, stillness. You might reach for your spouse in the dark and find nothing, or they might reach for you and you're the one who's gone. The rooster crows, the light seeps in, and someone says, they didn't wake. There's no warning, no explanation, just a body to wrap, a priest to summon, a grave to dig, and a life that shifts forever. And yet you sleep. Eventually your eyes grow heavy. The fear softens. The cold fades. Your spouse's breathing slows beside you. You curl inward, or outward, or into each other, and sleep claims you, not because you trust the night, but because you've survived it this long, because love in this world is not candles and violins. It's surviving until morning, together, and hoping the fire doesn't go out. So now, as the coals dim to ash and the air grows still, you lie beside your spouse in the cold, dark silence of your medieval home. Your feet ache, your eyes sting, your back feels like it's held together by linen thread and hope. You've worked, you've worried, you've cooked, prayed, bartered, mended, argued, forgiven, and wept. And somewhere in all of it, you've stayed married, not in spite of the chaos, but because of it. Because marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't just about companionship, it was about endurance. Two people, pushed together by family, sealed by church, tethered by duty, and made inseparable by the daily storm of life. Your marriage was never easy, but easy was never expected. And still you stayed. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was survival. Maybe, over the years, you stopped wondering which was which. Let's remember what it took. You lived without comfort. You slept on straw, ate hard bread, drank sour ale, and cleaned your teeth with ash. You never tasted chocolate. You never knew central heating. Your favorite possession might have been a single wooden bowl smooth from years of use, passed down from someone who once loved you. Your wedding dress was made of scratchy wool. Your roof leaked. Your feet froze. And still you woke up each morning and did the work again, together. Because that's what marriage was. Not luxury, not escape, just the quiet repetition of shared suffering and shared purpose. You lived with fear. You feared the church, the plague, the priest, the crops failing, the ox dying, the baby coughing, the night sounds that didn't belong. You feared hunger. You feared shame. You feared death. But you feared them together, and somehow that made it bearable. You lived with loss. Somewhere along the way, someone you loved died. Your mother, your sibling, maybe a child. The grief didn't break your world. It became part of it. A shadow at your table, a name whispered in prayer. And when your spouse saw you cry, they didn't try to fix it. They just sat beside you in silence and let the candle burn low. Because love, in the Middle Ages, was not grand, it was present, and that was enough. You laughed, sometimes. You shared a joke about the priest snoring. You made fun of your neighbor's hair. You teased your spouse when they fell into the pig pen. You snuck an extra egg into the stew and didn't tell anyone. You held hands when no one was looking. You danced badly at the harvest feast and didn't care who saw. Even in the dust and fear and cold, you found light. Because that's what people do. Even in the worst of times, we laugh. And sometimes, we love. Not the kind of love in poems or paintings, but the kind that builds over time, like smoke on stone, The kind that says, I see you. I know how hard this island, and I'm still here. That's medieval love. And now you sleep. You pull the blanket close. You curl beside the body that has aged with you, shared the same fears, eaten the same soup, fought the same aches. The fire hisses softly. The baby stirs once, then settles. A dog sighs at the door, and for a moment there is peace. Not because the world is safe, not because you are free, but because you have done enough for today. You have survived another day of life, and love, and married medieval misery. And tomorrow will come, full of the same chores and same fears, but not yet. Now, there is only this, the soft breath of your spouse beside you, the low whisper of the wind, and the knowing deep inside your bones that you are not alone, not in this bed, not in this house, not in this world. So tonight, as you drift off, remember, you don't have to wake up in the Middle Ages. You don't have to haul water. You don't have to boil herbs. You don't have to give birth on straw or shiver beside a fire that might go out. You're warm. You're safe. You're held. Sleep well, traveler. You've seen what it was really like. Now rest. You've earned it. Good night.